October 2018. A lot of young people have a false sense of security. I don't know if this is due to the movies we watch or the way we were raised, but its presence in our culture is undeniable. I was definitely among that group. I felt like I was the main character in my own motion picture, that no matter what situation I found myself in, I would always do something clever to escape. I felt invincible. After all, nothing really bad ever happens to the hero, right? Well, a few years ago, I got my first bitter taste of reality. Before I start the story, I think I should give some background on myself. My name's David. I had just turned 21 and I was in my junior year of college. It was October of 2018 in a small town in rural Missouri. During the previous summer, my girlfriend and I moved into a small rental home together that was just a few minutes off campus. Our home wasn't in the worst part of town, but it also wasn't some kind of rich, gated community. It was just a pretty standard rental home in a dingy neighborhood in a already dingy old town. Like I mentioned before, it was around mid-October when this happened, so we were knee-deep into spooky season. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Halloween Day. In fact, I think it's a little overrated, but I do enjoy all the spooky decorations and movies that come out around the holiday. I was actually binging those scary Reddit stories that people read off on YouTube, so I was a little jittery. Abby, my girlfriend, had driven down to her parents' house for a family emergency. I would be home alone for a few days, which didn't help. I was cramming to finish an essay that was due that night at around 11, so I practically barricaded myself in my room to avoid distractions. Hours later, after I finished my paper, I was greeted by feces on the living room floor. Shit, I thought to myself. I had forgotten to let Lucy, my girlfriend's dog, out to pee. She was a pretty quiet dog. She hardly ever whined or barked, so she didn't let me know she needed to be let out. I couldn't be mad at her though. I should have remembered to let her out. I opened the back door, letting the anxious old lab out to pee in the yard. She really took her time out there, and I didn't want to wait for her, so I normally left the sliding door open slightly. Lucy would open the door with her snout, and I would know she was back inside because the screen door would be open wider than I left it. Genius, I know. I made a sandwich in the kitchen while watching more of those spooky Reddit stories. I heard the screen door open in the other room, so I knew Lucy was back. After taking a huge bite, I walked over and closed the back door. Now, it was around sunset, so the day's worth of scary stories were starting to catch up to me. I had the paranoid feeling like I was being watched, like someone was standing just outside my kitchen window ready to stab me the moment I look away. I brushed it off as paranoia as I sat down in the living room to play the new Black Ops game online with some of my college buddies. As the night progressed, I became more and more anxious. I always played with the living room lights off, but it seemed extra dark that night. Maybe the moon wasn't out or something. I couldn't shake the feeling like I was being watched. I fully had the creeps at this point, constantly checking over my shoulder at the entrance to the kitchen. Eventually, I started hearing what sounded like thumps. I took off my headset to listen for a moment. Nothing but silence. I considered turning on the lights, but I knew I was being ridiculous. I don't believe in the supernatural, and I knew those Reddit stories just had me in a weird mood. I start to laugh, telling my friends in the game party how paranoid I am. I reassure myself that I'm fine. I'm just following the same routine I do every night. I thought to myself, maybe I just feel weird because Abby is gone, and I'm not used to being in this house alone. Around 11, that uneasy feeling returned. I was still playing Black Ops in the living room. Just to the right of the TV is the hallway that leads to my bedroom. I had left the door slightly opened earlier. I was focusing on the game, but in my peripheral, I swear I saw the door open slightly just before the top of someone's head peeked out to look at him. My eyes shot down the hall, but my retinas were fried from the bright light of the TV. All that I could see were pink and blue dots. I quickly stood up and flipped on the light, but there was nothing at the end of the hall, just the door that I'd left cracked open. Now, I was really starting to freak out. I told my friends that I would be right back. I wanted to check on something. I cautiously walked down the hall toward my bedroom. I opened the door and flipped on the light. Nothing. Nothing in the room even seemed to be touched. I checked the closet just to be safe. Again, nothing. I was relieved, but a little shaken. I shut off the lights right before leaving the room. I also closed the door behind me. I left the lights on in the living room while I continued to play Black Ops, constantly glancing down the hall. I was focused more on my bedroom door than the actual game. My friends noticed my drop in performance and asked me what was wrong. I just told them I was getting tired. It was around midnight after all. Yeah, I'm gonna hop off. I've got to be up at 8 a.m. tomorrow, one of my friends said. My other friends agreed. It was a Wednesday, so we all had to get up the next day for classes. One by one, my friends left the party until I was completely alone, and really anxious. It's not like Lucy could help either. Like I said before, if someone broke in, I doubt she would bark or even wake up to protect me. I reluctantly walked down the hall into my bedroom. Again, nothing seemed to be out of place. But I was still worried. I checked the closet again, but there was nothing there. What were you expecting to see? The boogeyman? I started chastising myself. I looked at my bed. It was pretty close to the ground, so no person bigger than a child could fit under it. Still, I wanted to check. I'm being insane. I mean, I like watching those Reddit videos, but they're gonna do this to me. I might need to stop watching them altogether, I thought to myself. I started getting almost angry with myself over the way I'd been acting. I forced myself to resist checking under the bed. I knew that I couldn't keep feeding my paranoia. I got into bed, laying on the right side like I always do. I turned off my bedside lamp. However, once the adrenaline of my self-criticism wore off and the darkness that surrounded me set in, all my fears returned. I need to get to sleep, I kept telling myself. My eyes darted around the room, half expecting to see a tall man with an axe standing in the shadowy corner by my door, or a ghost child floating above my bed. Around 10 minutes of this self-inflicted terror passed as I tossed and turned. Eventually, I'd had enough. I reached over to my nightstand and popped 2 5-milligram melatonin tablets. That's the only way I could see myself getting to sleep that night. I really didn't want to be nodding off during class the next morning. It didn't take long for the melatonin to kick in. In about 5 minutes, all my fears had drifted out of my mind. I turned over on my right side as the calm washed over me. I could feel myself losing consciousness. I was relieved to finally escape my fears when all of a sudden, I heard a single bark that sounded like it was coming from the back of the house. My eyes shot wide open. There's no way, I thought. That can't be Lucy. It must be a neighbor's dog. I'm stunned with terror as I realized that I never saw Lucy walking around the house. In fact, the last time I saw her was when I let her out. But if she didn't come back inside, how would the screen door? Thump. Something bumped my mattress. The underside of my mattress. I am now fully awake, petrified as I hear something shuffling around on the carpet on the left side of my bed. There is no way. I hear the sheets behind me start slowly rustling. I just wanted to stay still, but I knew that I would probably die if I didn't make a move. I slowly turned my head, looking over at the left side of the bed. A long, thin, unkept arm was reaching out of the darkness. It was feeling around where my girlfriend normally slept. A dirty head peeked over the side of the bed, just enough so I could see its eyes. The same head I thought I'd imagined peeking out of my bedroom. I've never screamed so loud in my life. I scrambled toward the right side of the bed. I must have scared the shit out of it because it jumped back, away from the bed. I tried to turn on the bedside lamp, but in a panic, I accidentally knocked it on the floor. Fight or flight kicked in. I knew that I had to get that light on. I couldn't fight this thing off in the dark, especially if it had a knife or something. I fell off the right side of the bed. As I reached for the lamp, I heard it jump on the bed. It was breathing loudly through its teeth. I switched on the lamp. I'll never forget what I saw when the lights went on. The creature was quickly scurrying across the bed. The light illuminated it from the underside, which cast a horribly large silhouette of the creature across the ceiling. It shrieked, cowering once again in the furthest corner of the room, the one right in front of the door. I stood up in disbelief as I held the lamp toward it. The creature was a woman. She was horribly thin, and her face looked like it was made of wax. Her terribly matted hair was black with gray streaks. She was clenching her jaw so tight that I could see her rotten yellow teeth past her then chapped lips. I was shocked. I wanted to scream again, but I couldn't make a noise. I just stood there shaking, holding the lamp out in front of me. The woman was hunched into a ball, rocking herself back and forth. Her breathing became more violent. Spit flew from her mouth as she breathed heavily through her clenched teeth. Her rocking became quicker. She looked like she was gripping something in her hand. I assumed it was some kind of weapon, like a knife. I waited for her breathing to slow down before I gently felt her on the top of my nightstand, searching for my phone, making sure not to take my eyes off her. I called the police. They dispatched 3 squad cars out to my location immediately. The operator stayed on the phone with me. She told me to stay where I was, as the woman was blocking my only exit. I was afraid she would try to attack me again, but she never did. The woman just continued to rock back and forth, muttering to herself. After what felt like an eternity, the police finally arrived. They had to break down the front door to get into my home because I had locked it before I went to bed. I yelled for them to signal where I was. I warned them that she was near the door and that I thought she might have a knife in her hand. She was so tense. It took multiple officers to pry her out of her ball position. Once they did, I was again horrified. In her left hand, the woman was adamantly gripping a syringe. A used syringe. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if she managed to stick me with it. I could have contracted HIV, AIDS, or something worse. Needless to say, I didn't go to class the next morning. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. What if Lucy never barked? Or if Abby was home? She normally went to bed before me. She could have been the one attacked in the night. I try not to think about it. I've been getting better recently, as I've been seeing a therapist about the incident. I guess if there is a moral to the story, it would be that you shouldn't downplay your fears. Most of the time, you're probably just paranoid. But sometimes, there might really be something watching you. So, it's not a bad idea to play it safe and check under your bed before turning out the lights.
Emergency service dispatchers, what is the scariest call you have ever gotten? One of the first calls I ever took. Woman calls up and asks about the process of filing a restraining order. She discusses how her boyfriend has been abusive and controlling. Mid-conversation the doorbell rings, she puts me on hold, opens the door, and I hear yelling. Guy barges in and starts beating on her, and I'm sitting there helpless listening, because I didn't have her address yet. Luckily, I did have her name, and within a few minutes we got her address and got help to her. She was pretty badly injured but lived, and he is still in jail. That call made me doubt myself and if I was in the right profession, but I stuck with it, and it has been a very rewarding, though sometimes sad, profession. One that always sticks with me is the guy who phoned to tell me he'd shot himself in the head. He was slurring his words and sounded drunk. But no, he'd actually shot himself in the head and was dead by the time the crew got there. That was a weird one to get my head around. I also took a call from a 15-year-old kid who came home from school to find his dad hanging. So I had to basically ask him if he was cold, could he cut him down, all the usual, while this poor kid was panicking to hell. And then the kid stops answering my questions. And the dispatcher next to me gets the emergency call from the neighbors saying they don't know what's going on, but there's a kid standing in the street just screaming. I think about that poor kid a lot, and I absolutely detest his father for doing that to him, when he knew his son would be the one who'd find him. Probably the other one that stands out is the call from the woman who'd just been raped. She'd been coming home from a club, and someone had pushed through her door behind her as she unlocked it. When he left, she called me. I still remember the way she screamed when she heard knocking on her door again, And I had to yell at her to try to make her understand it was the police, and not the guy coming back. I didn't sleep well after that night shift at all. Caller. Muffled voice. Me, I can't understand you, what's the location of the emergency? Caller, sounding clearer, like Kermit the Frog, gives address. I'm going to hang myself. Me, sir, we can help you, talk to me. What's been happening? Caller, I just want you to move my body before my family get back. Me, please, there's nothing that can't be. Crack, gargling, silence. I had to stay on the line until I heard police on scene. He had a hands-free kit on. I wasn't even allowed 5 minutes break. I had a breakdown after. I can't describe those sounds. Haunts me to this day. I cannot describe the feeling of being so intimately involved in the moment of such a traumatic death. He gave his pain to me. Edit for context, suicidal calls and death were common. Part of the job. But this was so sudden, I was the last voice he heard. Also it was 2 a.m. on Christmas Day. I was wearing a Santa hat. Looking forward to seeing my family. I had to cancel and went home, spend the day alone and shaking. I can't share this with people I know, I don't want to spread his pain further. Now I have PTSD. Yay! I worked for a sheriff's office and a good friend of mine was a dispatcher. I stepped outside one day for a smoke and my buddy was standing there shaking and crying. I asked him what was wrong and he told me that he had just dispatched a call for his best friend. His friend was a former Army sniper and had only been out for a few months. He was a volunteer firefighter and was responding to a house fire, rolled the truck, and had been decapitated. Guy had 5 young daughters. Was a 911 operator for 10 years. Scariest is probably different than worst. My scariest was an active shooter in a high rise. Just sitting on the line trying to give the best directions so everyone makes it out okay. And what was your worst if I may ask? I have 2. When I first started out, I worked for a rural county and some areas were very far from help. One night I got a call from a group of people who were in a 3 meters accident and their car caught fire. The girl I was speaking with was stuck in her seatbelt and as the fire spread she was in terrible amounts of pain. She kept begging me to send help and I was, but it was far away. I stayed with her until the phone dropped, assumingly the phone and it melted or malfunctioned. The other was a hanging. The father called me for a welfare check and I was putting in the call when he got to the house. He said the door was unlocked, so I stayed landline while he went inside and he found his son. The pain in the moment he walked out and told his wife was so horrible and raw. From the last time I answered this. A woman called, screaming her head off, that she had driven into a body of water, her car was filling up with water, she couldn't open the door, she didn't know where she was, etc. Kids in the car, we're all going to die. Meanwhile I'm like ooh, what the hell do I do now? Try to find out details about where she is, we know she can see a massive shopping center but it could be anywhere even remotely close to that. Local units all fan out to the different large ponds/streams etc. it could be. Call the Coast Guard and Marine support units to help. Try to find out what kind of body of water it is, how big it is etc. And she is just too panicked to answer any questions whatsoever. Managed to get the registration of her vehicle and that was it. Turned out she had driven into a flooded road, flooded from rain, not anywhere near an actual body of water. Absolutely zero danger of the water going past her knees. Well, to be fair, people have died on flooded roads. It happened here about 8 years ago and a whole family died. It was near a river but you couldn't see it from that area. My husband was one of the 6 responders who recovered the children of Chris Watts from the oil batteries he dumped them in last year. It will actually be a year next week. Posted this before. A 3-year-old was at a campground with her family and they let her out of their sight for 20 seconds and she wandered down to a creek and drowned. Her mom found her and her father called in. While I was getting details from the understandable distraught father, a random guy camping there was doing CPR managed to resuscitate her. I can't imagine how her parents felt, but it was like physical weight being lifted off of me. My sister works as a dispatcher. Her first week on the job, she had a man call in, saying he was going to kill himself. He told her that she couldn't do anything to change his mind, he was simply trying to let her know where he could be found. She heard the gunshot through the call. Second one, she had a little girl call in because her dad was unresponsive. She knew that CPR would likely save this man, but the daughter wasn't grown enough and didn't have the strength to perform it effectively. My sister had to tell her to leave the room, because the longer that girl stayed in there trying fruitlessly to save her father, the more scarred she would become by the experience of watching her father die. Not a dispatcher but a paramedic. But a man called, saying his mom had severe chest pains. So we head over to their address in a hurry. However, there was no mom, just the caller waiting for us and then robbing us at gunpoint saying he were going to kill us. He just wanted the drugs, but was quite shocking still. Always going through my mind when entering some shady neighborhood. I think the most genuine terror comes from child callers. I had this 5-year-old call in that her dad was growling and wouldn't wake up. Okay, agonal breathing, probably a heart attack, scrambling to get a confirmed address for EMS, PD dispatched to unconfirmed address. Finally confirm the address and start giving directions on CPR. Nope, she will not touch him because she is scared, then bursts into tears. Luckily PD arrived just after she refused and they were able to do CPR until EMS arrived. Not a dispatcher but one told me that one time he got a call from a 19-year-old girl. It was late and she was new to driving, in the US. Her car slipped on black ice and went over the bridge. Her car sank in the river and she called 911 and he received it. He tried to keep her calm. Poor girl was an au pair from same country in Africa. She was crying because she was going to die in a foreign country, and to make things worse she didn't even know where she was. They couldn't find her fast enough. The dispatch even remembers her last words. "Tell my sister I'm sorry I left." This story haunts me to this day. I'm also an au pair. Call came in and was flagged as a frequent caller on the end of a very rural county. The dude was just screaming. We couldn't make out anything he was saying, but we had his address and sent every available unit we had. After a while the screaming started to die down and his breathing got very labored. He wouldn't talk to us but he just kept muttering. After a few minutes we realized he was praying. Few minutes later deputy arrived on scene. Heard him check in on scene and also heard him on the line. First noise I heard was him vomiting. Turned out the dude had been working on his car and the lift collapsed. The guy wasn't under the car but was between it and a tree when the car started rolling. He was impaled on a branch and pinned between the tree and car. Dude lived. He's a quadriplegic but he's alive. First legit 911 call he ever made, and everyone took their sweet time getting there because it was usually nonsense. Not a dispatcher myself, but the worst call I've heard of involved two friends of mine. James was a cop that had been a 911 dispatcher before he got his badge. Al was my former roommate. After I moved out of state, he moved in with James. At the time of this story, James was recovering from an injury and took a shift at dispatch because they were short-staffed. He got a call that very matter-of-factly said, "I am going to shoot myself. Please send someone to, address, to collect my body." He's a little freaked because that's his address. It was Al. He tried to talk him out of it and was still on the phone when Al pulled the trigger. It messed him up for a while. Obligatory not an emergency dispatcher, I had a conversation with one once where we discussed his craziest work stories, and his was taking the call of a man who had just drowned his two small daughters in a lake near their house. He had to stay on the phone with this sociopath, asking him questions about the time and location of the murders, until the police arrived to take him into custody. He never did find out if they ever found the children or if either of them survived in the end. I've come into contact with a fair number of sexual predators/child molesters in my line of work, but I never had to interact with them immediately after their crimes and press them for details. It's a lot to ask of someone. I've always had a lot of respect for emergency dispatchers and the folks who run abuse, rape, and suicide hotlines. My mother worked dispatch and got a call from a woman whose husband had locked in a trailer and lit it on fire. The windows had been boarded up and there was no way for her to get out. This was in the 90s, so landline, and then the call cut out when the cord started to burn. By the time fire and police arrived it was too late. The best she got was from a woman who was very active labor. My mom had to talk her and her teenage daughter through delivering the baby. By the time EMS got there they had healthy baby boy. A teenager bleeding out after just giving birth in the hallway and nothing I can do to stop it. I worked as a deaf relay operator, 611, so we would often get 911 calls when people dialed the number wrong. We have to stay on the call and get them to 911 and can't leave until call is concluded. Guy is super tired trying to catch a few winks on the side of Interstate 5 when a car pulls up behind him and people jump out and try to get in the car. He drives off and calls 911 and the car follows. They are speeding down the road and he's giving the dispatcher the name of every exit he just passed and he's saying the car is still behind him and at times is trying to pull side by side. He's extremely scared. I'm on the edge of my seat. The call drops. My late wife was a 911 dispatcher for 15 years. The two worst I remember her telling me of were a call she didn't answer, but was on during duty and heard the playback of. A woman called that her ex-boyfriend was breaking into her house and he then beat her to death with a hammer, all of which was heard on the phone. When they were hearing it, they weren't sure what it was but found out when the officers arrived. The second was when she was doing EMS calls. A man had recently had surgery on his legs and was unable to get up out of bed or his recliner by himself. He calls because his wife is having a heart attack on the other side of the room and he can't do anything to help her. She said listening to him begging for help was the worst thing she ever had to sit through.